And in South America tonight, an environmental problem of a much greater magnitude. The destruction
of the Amazon rainforest.
A worldwide disaster.
In the 1980s, the world learned that the Amazon was in danger.
Trees are falling at a startling rate.
77,000 square miles of
an area twice the size of Belgium.
The size of New York State.
The size of California disappears.
And why it was so important to save it.
1/5
the oxygen we breathe.
20% of
the world's fresh water.
Half of the species of life on Earth is in these forests.
It's an ecosystem the entire world needs for its survival.
By the 1990s, it seemed like it was too late.
The destruction accelerates.
More than twice as fast as previously believed.
Virtually impossible to control.
Once it is gone, it is gone.
The Amazon was ground zero of global-scale resource issues and crises that arose in the 80s. The greatest rainforest on Earth was threatened on all sides by mining and logging, massive dams, and cattle ranchers. In 1982, Brazil's generals launched a disastrous colonization scheme.
Brazil's military regime saw the potential for profit deep in the Amazon. There were about 5 million square kilometers of rainforest filled with natural resources.
Amazonia's ores and minerals, food, fiber, and forest resources are vast.
But most of it was inaccessible. So the government started building the Trans-Amazonian Highway, an ambitious project that would run for 3,200 kilometers connecting remote parts of the rainforest. At the time, most of Brazil's population lived in the southeast, in cities like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. And the government wanted to move people out here to cultivate the land and grow the economy. So they offered free land along the highway and paid Brazilians to settle deeper in the rainforest. And they sparked a land rush. As the roads advanced, settlers followed, rapidly clearing the forest around it.
Settlers marched into the forest and burnt it down, only to find that the soil was too poor to grow crops.
Most of them turned their land into pasture, where they raised cows to sell as beef. And when these ranchers needed more land, they seized another plot, cleared it, and moved their cattle in. This expansion deeper into the Amazon drove up deforestation.
The fate of the Amazon turned on a most unlikely environmental hero, a poor rubber tapper and union organizer named Chico Mendes.
Você sempre é seringueiro?
Sempre fui seringueiro. Meu pai era seringueiro. Eu comecei a cortar com 9 anos de idade. E durante 20 anos eu cortei seringa direto. Só em 75, mais ou menos, quando chegaram os fazendeiros, eu entrei no sindicato. Aí eu parei mais um pouco, cortava menos.
The rubber tappers, known as seringueiros, squatted off the old seringals, or plantations, produced rubber and subsisted off the land. They were protected by being in the remote western Amazon, where roads had not penetrated. But as ranchers arrived and began clearing the land to claim it for tax breaks, Chico Mendes organized the rubber tappers to defend their territory.
A intenção dos fazendeiros é realmente tomar todas essas terras. Nós não temos nenhuma intenção de... E essa luta nós vamos levá-la até o fim, porque não vamos permitir que as nossas florestas sejam destruídas.
The rubber tappers organized empates, or standoffs, non-violent protests in the tradition of Gandhi and Martin Luther King, where they surrounded the trees and tried to explain what a disaster cutting down the forest was for everyone.
Pode ficar despreocupado que ninguém...
Não, rapaz, eu não tenho medo.
Claro que não, que você é um trabalhador que nem nós. O objetivo de ficar com tudo nas mãos. Então, uma vez o senhor acabando com essa riqueza que é sua, que é nossa, que é do seringueiro, que é de todo o trabalhador, É uma beleza para eles que eles vão ficar com tudo, porque aqui tudo vai ficar cercado de arame e cheio de boi. E de que nós vamos viver. Então, acima de tudo, companheiros. Vocês não são já vistos da fazenda.
But they actually were able to stop the forest cutting by standing in front of the trees. It's a real heroic story, and it happened often enough that it actually impeded an entire cattle ranching operation so much that they gave up.
Que é Fazenda Santa Fé, Fazenda Filipina e outros por aí afora. Mas aqui, que pela primeira vez, se teve uma vitória contra o grupo da Bordon, o mais poderoso dessa região. A vitória, por quê? Porque pela primeira vez a gente conseguiu mesmo defender a posse de um companheiro.
American environmentalists helped bring Chico Mendes to the United States to campaign against the World Bank, whose loans led to destructive development.
The World Bank wants us to believe that they are helping the people in those areas. Now, this is a big lie and an infamous lie. The opposite is true. The people living in the forests, they have an interest in their preservation.
I hope that the governments which give money to the IDB, the people of the US, England, Japan, Europe, who contribute their taxes to finance the IDB, will listen to the Seringueros' complaints.
Our subcommittee is going to continue to put pressure on the IDB to withhold funds, to cut off all funds, possibly, if they are not more cooperative.
Chico Mendes, em defesa da floresta amazônica, contra a devastação da mata, contra a expulsão do homem e sua troca pelo boi, pela criação de reservas extrativistas.
Chico was coming to understand that saving their way of life meant saving the Amazon. He began to build alliances with other rabbit tappers and indigenous groups.
Several leaders and Chico decided to hold a meeting to try to form a national council of rubber tappers. What they all came to the conclusion of was that they needed to have rights to use the land. That one of the things that was keeping them from being able to effectively defend the forest against the chainsaw loggers and the cattle ranchers was not having an actual right to this land. They were seen as squatters.
The idea was raised that there should be rubber tapper reserves like Indian reserves. The people wouldn't own the land, but it would be theirs for as long as they wanted to work it. It was an idea of the people who actually lived in the forest. That was a huge breakthrough in concept. This is a great movement within Amazonia, and that's what Chico started.
The rubber tappers decided to establish the first reserve at Cachoeira, the old rubber plantation where Chico was born and lived with family and friends. However, the land had been bought by a rancher named Darlí Alves. So the Seringueiros went to court to claim their squatter rights. It turned into a showdown.
Chapuri ranches have always had trouble with Seringueros blocking their deforestation. Every time the ranchers tried to deforest, they were blocked. In Chapuri, it's stalemate.
We're in immediate danger. We're seeing people killed, and there could be many more. The Paraná Ranch is terrorizing the whole population of Chapuri to strike at me, at Comercindo, at Raimundo Barros, and the whole directorate of our workers' movement.
Queremos que uma conquista pacífica, mas se chegar o momento de dizer, olha, do lado pacífico não vai dar, e nós não podemos ser desmoralizados, nós vamos ter que partir para o confronto, consciente de que alguém vai perder a vida. Nós vamos... Assim mesmo nós assim mesmo?
The rubber tappers won. Cachoeira was declared the first extractive reserve in the world. It was an important victory to the whole of the Amazon. But the rancher Darlí Alves had vowed to kill Chico Mendes.
This has not been a bloodless journey. Some have already fallen, defending extractive reserves. No one likes to die, but if it has to happen, then it should be to create more life. I promise, before the blood of our companion Chico Mendes, to continue his work, to show our enemies that they will never succeed in silencing the voice of the Serengueros. Chico Mendes, wherever you are, don't grieve that they have silenced your voice. Your ideas exist among us.
There were things that came together after his death that probably couldn't have come together if he was still alive, because they'd still be fighting over whether the extractive reserves should be established or not. After he was killed, there was no question. So now it's quite clear that who saves forests are the people in the forest.
Chico Mendes' work proved to be the turning point in the battle to save the Amazon. The Brazilian government recognized the rights of the forest peoples and established an array of parks and protected areas. $58 million acres were set aside in extractive reserves. 40% of the Brazilian Amazon was formally protected. However, the fate of the forest is still in doubt. Now it is not just cattle ranchers, but soy farming on an industrial scale and illegal logging.
Between 1978 and 88, an average of over 20,000 square kilometers were cut down each year. Over time, this whole area became known as the arc of deforestation, and soon a different product pushed this even further.
Satellite images show that enormous areas of Amazon rainforest were cleared, mostly along an arc of deforestation on the southern boundary of the Amazon basin. The Brazilian states of Rondônia, Pará and Mato Grosso saw the largest losses. Major roads such as the BR-163 running from north to south across the 1985 image of Mato Grosso provided access to the forest. 20 years later, much of the forest is gone, replaced by soy fields and cattle pastures. Severe droughts in 2005 and 2010 increased the frequency of fire, and have reinforced concerns that the Amazon is reaching a tipping point where large areas of forest could be replaced by a more savanna-like ecosystem.
And in 1984, Brazil plugged the Jamari River with the Samuel hydroelectric dam. The reservoir it created flooded the upstream forest. The image on the right also captures the effects of deforestation that could cut the Amazon to just 47% of its original size by 2030.
Many dams in the Amazon power the extraction and smelting of iron, copper, gold, as well as bauxite, the raw material for aluminum. These export-oriented industries generate few jobs in the region. Tucuruí Dam, built in 1984, powers the largest iron mine in the world, called Carajás. Tucuruí's reservoir flooded 200,000 hectares of forest, displaced thousands of indigenous people, and led to widespread deforestation over 25 years, seen here in time-lapse satellite imagery. Investment in mining is expected to boom in the Amazon with the addition of more hydroelectric dams.
In the early 2000s, Brazil's beef and soy industries were driving a booming economy, as well as unprecedented rates of deforestation, which caused this arc to expand further north. The staggering deforestation in the Amazon attracted fierce resistance from environmental groups.
An area of ancient forest the size of a football field is destroyed every 2 seconds.
The Brazilian government, under President Lula da Silva, finally stepped in.
Já em 2003 percebemos que esse tipo de situação não se combate apenas com ações emergencial.
This is Marina Silva. She was Brazil's environment minister in 2003, where she helped craft a plan to stop deforestation.
Então nós resolvemos atacar as causas.
It started with the government expanding the amount of rainforest under protection. At the time, only about 28% was protected, and there was very little oversight. But this new plan added more reserves where business activities were strictly banned, and also created more sustainable use reserves, where some businesses, like Brazilian nut harvesting and rubber tapping, which didn't destroy the rainforest, were allowed. More land was also demarcated for indigenous people who preserved the forest. Over time, hundreds of new protected lands were added, transforming the Amazon into a shared and sustainable space.
Com base nesse uso e nesse manejo sustentável, começou-se a pensar uma ideia de preservação, de conservação dos recursos naturais que fosse capaz de integrar numa mesma equação economia e ecologia.
Eventually, almost half the Amazon would be put under some form of protection, while the rest of it remained a mix of pasture, farms, and rainforest. To prevent further deforestation here, the government strengthened the forest code, which said landowners could only clear 20% of their private land. This law was monitored by the Forest Service, which was part of the Environmental Ministry, which had jurisdiction over all these protected lands. And the key to enforcing this entire plan was strengthening IBAMA, a police agency that would track and fine people for illegal deforestation. And the plan showed results, with deforestation rates falling by more than half in 2006. At the same time, an activist movement was forcing the agricultural industry to make a change. Major food companies started feeling pressure from consumers for participating in deforestation. So several got together and in 2006 signed a soy moratorium, which meant they could continue to operate within existing farms, but they wouldn't buy soy from any newly deforested land in the Amazon. 3 years later, beef companies signed a similar agreement. Other countries also gave Brazil money to help it protect the Amazon. So under all this protection, deforestation rates plummeted to historic lows. And yet, Brazil's soy and beef industries continued to grow thanks to more efficient techniques. Ranchers started growing crops on their existing pastures, and farmers planted 2 crops a year on their land instead of 1. Brazil had found a way to make the Amazon both productive and protected.
Xingu River is one of the most important rivers of the Amazon. It sustains the livelihoods of over 25,000 indigenous people from 18 ethnic groups, riverbank populations, and innumerable species of plants and animals. The Xingu Basin contains the largest contiguous mosaic of protected areas in Brazil, combining indigenous territories and conservation areas. Yet here in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, the Brazilian government is planning to construct what would be the 3rd largest hydroelectric dam in the world, Belo Monte.
O contrato que autoriza a construção da hidrelétrica de Belo Monte foi assinado hoje em Brasília. A obra é a maior do PAC.
Mais de 20.000 funcionários se revezam dia e noite para concluir em 5 anos o maior projeto de engenharia.
A construção da usina de Belo Monte está transformando o interior do Pará. 11 cidades serão afetadas pelo surgimento da 4ª maior hidrelétrica do país.
As work concludes on Belo Monte, tens of thousands of workers contracted to build the dam are no longer required. Many have left the region. The city of Altamira is less chaotic today than during the frenzied building boom. However, as the dust continues to settle, longtime residents say the city is unrecognizable since the dam broke ground. Who came to Altamira for work stayed, even when their contracts ended. Those unsuccessful in finding new employment added to the city's already high unemployment rate. Outside Altamira, close to 10,000 indigenous peoples from 11 different ethnic groups live along and rely on the Xingu River. The Arara and Juruna villages are just 10 kilometers downstream from the principal dam of Belo Monte. The Xingu's flow through the Big Bend has been drastically reduced because most of the river is now redirected into an artificial canal that feeds the dam's main reservoir. However, the flow through the Big Bend now surges from time to time when the reservoir is too full and operators release water back via spillways.
Depois que o reservatório encheu, né, e o pessoal, a empresa abriu as comportas, aliás, o rio encheu numa velocidade, numa quantidade tão grande que acabou levando todos os nossos pertences aqui no porto.
The surges are so violent and so unpredictable that children are restricted from playing in the water or close to shore. Shortly following the main reservoir's flooding, over 16 tons of fish were found dead, leading Ibama to fine North Energy more than $10 million. During Belo Monte's licensing phase, fish stocks were given little consideration. Not only do indigenous people rely on fish for sustenance, but fishermen in and around the region rely on fishing as an activity to generate income. Today, indigenous groups and fishermen are suffering. There is also a requirement that dam builders carry out mitigation measures for indigenous peoples affected by the dam along the Xingu. Given a lack of consultation throughout the entire licensing process and failure to address the dam's impacts, many indigenous groups resorted to occupying the dam site and shutting down work on Belo Monte. In 2012, North Energy created an emergency plan to deal with the more immediate concerns to the company, such as occupations of the dam site. The plan distributed boats, gasoline and motor oil, televisions, cars, and provided a $10,000 monthly allowance for each village. Many viewed this as a ploy by the company to buy their silence and keep them at bay. Not all indigenous groups agreed to accept a deal, and this created divisions that worked in the dam builders' favor. That emergency plan is now the focus of yet another federal prosecutor's lawsuit. The case argues that the handouts to indigenous groups have chipped away at their autonomy, giving North Energy and the government greater control over their lives, constituting the systematic, long-term, and deliberate destruction of their cultures, or in short, ethnocide. In March of 2016, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples paid a visit to the village of Muratu to hear from the Jiruna firsthand about their new concerns dealing with the construction companies, the government, and now the dam itself.
I have heard about the impacts of the Belmont Dam on them, that the conditions that they have agreed upon are not being addressed, and I have also heard about
The following day, the UN Special Rapporteur met another indigenous group at the early stages of a similar catastrophic situation.
Nós queremos que sejam garantidos todos os nossos direitos, que simplesmente o governo federal tem passado por cima dos nossos direitos.
On another tributary of the Amazon River, in the same state as the Xingu and Belo Monte, a series of hydroelectric dams are being proposed for the Tapajós River. Together they would flood hundreds of thousands of square miles in national parks and other protected areas. These dams would also have significant impacts on several indigenous lands and communities. Among them, the Munduruku. Those most affected once again feel they are being kept in the dark when it comes to decisions about the future of their lands and their lives. The assault on the Tapajós River, if allowed, will not end with these dams. The government intends to build 43 large dams and 100 smaller ones throughout the entire Tapajós Basin. This at a time when new studies warn that dam proponents overestimate the economic benefits and underestimate far-reaching effects on biodiversity and critically important fisheries. These studies also touch on the lack of transparency with hydroelectric projects and questions whether the public and communities affected are properly informed about the risks and long-term impacts of dams on tropical rivers. Still, for the government and dam advocates, the default sales pitch for building new hydroelectric projects is that they produce clean energy.
Então, que energia limpa é? Não tem energia limpa aqui. A população está toda submersa. Ela não foi, tinha que fazer a supressão da vegetação para evitar um apodrecimento, né, das árvores, que ia tornar a água imprópria.
When vegetation decays in water, it produces methane, a greenhouse gas 50 to 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide, making dams in tropical areas more problematic for the climate and as bad as some coal-fired power stations. Belo Monte was inaugurated by Brazil's president just 2 weeks before she was removed from office to stand trial in impeachment proceedings. At the same time, the nation has become embroiled in its largest corruption scandal in history. A scandal that involves the state oil company, Petrobras, several political figures, construction companies, and yes, Belo Monte.
É uma usina grandiosa. A melhor forma de descrever Belo Monte é essa palavra, grandiosa. Eu quero dizer que esse empreendimento, Belo Monte, me orgulha muito pelo que ele produziu de ganhos sociais e ambientais, que foram amplamente descritos aqui. Eu queria dizer para vocês algumas coisas que nós fizemos aqui na região. Por quê? Porque a usina de Belo Monte não é um projeto isolado, é um projeto de desenvolvimento.
The Ruralistas, a group of conservative politicians who represent the interests of the agricultural industry, including farmers and ranchers, started gaining influence in Brazil. In the early 2000s, they had about 17% of the seats in Congress. But by 2012, they had about 30%, enough power to push President Dilma Rousseff to weaken the Forest Code, which allowed landowners to get away with clearing more land. In 2016, they pushed President Michel Temer to slash Obama's budget. They also helped him pass a law that made it easier for people who illegally seized land in the Amazon to keep it. These changes emboldened some people to seize and clear the rainforest again. And that led to a rise in deforestation rates. In 2018, as the Ruralistas controlled 44% of Congress, Jair Bolsonaro, a right-wing congressman and ally to the Ruralistas, was elected president. On his second day in office, he transferred the Forest Service, which monitors the Forest Code, to the Agricultural Ministry, led by a Ruralista. He's also worked to systematically weaken the Environmental Ministry. Under Bolsonaro, deforestation has increased significantly in 2019, most of it taking place in these protected areas.
In 2019, the world was shocked to see the vibrant and lush Amazon rainforest on fire. These cataclysmic infernos were not an act of nature. No. Most of the fires were deliberately set by criminal arsonists motivated by greed. With illegal deforestation increasing by 80%, there was enough tinder for the fires to quickly spread across the entire Amazon basin. Jair Bolsonaro's regressive policies and corporate profiteering set the Amazon ablaze. focused only on quick profits from land grabbing and from expanding destructive agribusinesses like cattle ranching and massive soy plantations. Between 2018 and 2019, the number of fires in the Amazon nearly doubled, torching more than 7 million hectares of forest in Brazil and 4 million hectares in Bolivia. That's 11 million hectares, an area larger than Iceland. In the last year, more than 40 environmental and human rights defenders, including indigenous leaders on the front lines, have been murdered for defending the Amazon. This cannot go on.
I'm one of the targets. I'm one of those who could be persecuted and murdered for standing up and giving a voice to the people of the Amazon.
Indigenous peoples have known for thousands of years that cures to many of the world's diseases lie deep within the biodiversity of the Amazon's vital ecosystems. Our survival literally hinges on its preservation. Indigenous peoples in the Amazon are among the most vulnerable to COVID-19. The potential for ethnocide is real for the very people who are the best stewards and protectors of the Amazon rainforest. We must unite to bring an end to this nightmare. We're on the brink of losing the world's largest and most biodiverse rainforest. Continued deforestation will disrupt its rainfall pattern and turn the rainforest into a source of carbon. This would raise global temperatures and reverse all of our previous climate change efforts.
The scientists have said, if we continue at this rate, we will reach the tipping point of ecological collapse in the Amazon.
We are at the ecological tipping point now. If we don't act, by 2025, 50% of the Amazon could be degraded and deforested, putting the rainforest beyond recovery.
The Amazon is also home to over 400 distinct indigenous peoples. They protect the rainforest. They've been doing this for thousands of years, and they have called upon us to stand with them, to resist this destruction and show our solidarity.